6 months ago, my girlfriend Marie and I decided to get out of the house for once and go to the beach. We had both allowed bong hits and Skyrim to eat away at our lives for far too long. We both had Mondays off because of our scheduling, working at a hospital, and that particular Monday was supposed to be bright and clear out. So we planned on watching the sunrise. In West Palm Beach, Florida, the beaches are beautiful ghost towns during the week to begin with. But she had heard of a secluded beach sitting in front of a vacant line of homes on Palm Beach Island. It had been years since I had been to the beach, but dating Marie had altered our lives for the better and the worse. And one of the worst parts was that we both enabled each other to sit at home every day and night and just smoke pot. I had only dated 2 other girls, so I thought that she was heaven sent. I committed myself to cleaning up my act, and I planned out the day so that we wouldn't have any excuses not to go. I knew of a parking lot close enough to it, and the police generally ignored the beaches during the day. So we grabbed some Cuban sandwiches from Havana's, the most popular place for them, and we headed off. I remember the beach being absolutely beautiful that day. We hiked a bit from our parking lot and we passed the home that she knew to be safe. A gigantic Spanish mansion that was locally famous and built during Henry Flagler's era of obsession with the Spanish Moorish-inspired architecture. I was briefly tempted to check out one of the massive turrets and began to ascend one of their stairs. But sunrise was almost starting, and Marie had announced that she was horny and she ran ahead of me. When I got past the dense walls of green palms to the water, violet ribbons of pink, orange, and blue had exploded from the horizon, turning the water into neon hues of the sky and making the beach look like a vaporwave album cover. The water was almost perfectly serene, and it looked like an unfinished area of a video game, just a sheer surface of impossible colors. But Maria didn't seem interested in that. She was standing waist deep in the water, staring down with a concerned look on her face. Even at that time in the morning, the water was utterly transparent, allowing me to see crystalline-looking fish darting about far past her, but I couldn't see what she was staring at. "Babe, come check this out." A mildly frightened tone had entered her voice. I swam out to her, no longer aware of the blissful shades of purple, pink, and turquoise the colors of the sunrise were rapidly adjusting to. When I got to her, I stubbed my toe on something sharp. It was still somewhat dark out, but I couldn't really make out what had cut my toe open. The water shifted in colors like a gemstone with a million facets, making it impossible to see any kind of outline. After cursing for a bit, I carefully bent down to feel for the mystery object. Marie drifted away and made it clear that sex would be available if I followed. I pulled my hand back when I felt something hard and shockingly cold. Whatever it was blended into the crystalline shades reflected from the sky, and I figured that it was probably glass. So I told Marie that we should probably head to the shore in case there were shards in the water. But I didn't hear a response. I looked over to where I had last heard her voice, and I saw a little cloud of scarlet filling the small part of the water, right below her bikini top, which she had discarded. Her bikini top was floating near a small pale thing that I couldn't quite make out. "Marie?" I asked nervously. The moment I turned around to the house to see if she had gone to shore, the water near the scarlet cloud erupted with a cloud of scarlet and Marie's screams. Her body seemed to emerge from the gem-like water as if it had been previously hidden by a video editing effect, firing out whole and suddenly, including plumes of CGI blood. She didn't even manage to get the word "help" out, but I'll never forget the sound of her voice and the look on her face, as she seemed to attempt to paddle towards me. She managed to get about 2 strokes in when suddenly her legs disappeared again, and the water behind her was suddenly clear. The look on her face was one of shock, but she suddenly went limp, turning to face the sky as red blossomed out from the bottom of her torso into the water. And then there was a sudden disturbance in the water, as if there were fish behind her. What was left of my beautiful girlfriend was then pulled below the surface. I would like to say that it happened too quickly for me to do anything, and it probably did. The reality is, though, that I was so shocked by what I saw that I didn't move at all. I just stood there. I even called out her name again, as if what I had just seen was some kind of amazing practical joke. It wasn't until the water clearly began to move again, this time towards me, that I freaked the hell out and I began to scream and paddle. And it was towards the shoreline and not the area where a thick cloud of blood hung below a bikini top and a small pale thing. This is the first thing that I think about when I take my first drink of Jack Daniels every morning. I got out of the water and whatever was chasing me did an about face, turning back sharply in the moment my feet were on dry land. I called the cops right away and I didn't move until they got there. They didn't believe a word of my story, and after a pretty long time at the station, they only let me go because they had no idea how Marie had died. It turns out that the pale thing that was floating in the water behind her was her foot, severed so cleanly that the police had thought perhaps I had stolen surgical equipment, so we knew that she was dead at that point. I was the only suspect, and at first they thought that I had just ditched her foot there. But apparently some neighbor lady had called the police already complaining about the two of us. That is the only reason that I'm a free man today, because she told them that she had saw her from down the beach scream and get pulled under, but that I wasn't near her at the time. The police didn't even seem interested in the case after that, and I was told that it was probably a riptide. They seemed to ignore her severed foot and my memory of her being cut in half. That was all 6 months ago. Apparently, I should inform the police if I'm planning on going out of town or anything, but aside from that, it seems like they've closed the case. But I haven't. I have talked to the old, hilariously rich woman who had accidentally saved my wife, Gertrude, at least a dozen times. At first, she seemed disgusted with me, and then she pitied me, and now she seems to love having me over to tell stories to. I know everything about the architect of the home we had passed through, Joseph Irons. He was an apprentice of Addison Meisner and Sherman Childs, the two men who had littered South Florida with beautiful architecture that had a style that was utterly distinct to Florida, combining elements of New England and Old World Spanish architecture into a new tropical fad that ran from the 1910s to the 1970s, waning only after the Kennedys slowly stopped visiting. He had died swimming behind that very house, supposedly after getting caught in one of Florida's notorious riptides. In addition to Gertrude's admittedly amazing stories, I had taken up alcoholism and some occasional harder drugs to deal with the changes in my life. After her parents made it clear that they thought that I had killed her, and they didn't want to see me at the funeral, I had taken a hard turn south in my life. I became obsessed with the number of strange deaths that happened along the coast. A man had claimed that he and his wife had been skinned by angry natives after she found a strange mask in her multi-million-dollar Palm Beach home. A young girl who had been missing for weeks had been found dissected near the Flagler mansion, but rumor had it that her body had not been decomposed or shown any signs of being frozen, and was still warm to the touch when her weeping parents finally held her belated funeral. Gertrude had known that the currents were suspiciously dangerous along the home Marie and I had walked through, but there had never been any deaths, even at their directly adjacent neighbor's beach. I began to get wasted with a guy named Paul who didn't dodge a piss test at work and got fired. Paulie had taken to stealing from his neighbors and even his family to keep his habit going. Opioids are a nightmare. Everybody in Florida knows that. So when he had to crash on my couch after getting kicked out of his mom's house, he's 36, I didn't give him a hard time about it. I snatched some Roxycodone that had been placed in a bin to be destroyed for him the day after he had moved in, and he's been a relatively grateful friend ever since. I'll admit that he did help me through some hard spots too, even if he did steal my credit card once. I haven't been able to sleep right since it had happened, and the amount of alcohol it takes to go to sleep at night had been getting larger every week. One night about 2 months ago, I had a horrible nightmare where Marie and I were at the beach again. We were kissing in the water as it scintillated to reflect the ever-changing sunrise when suddenly she cried out in a surprise. We both looked down and there was a giant cloud of blood where her legs had been, She snapped back as if being pulled on a leash and disappeared below the surface without even making a noise. I screamed in rage, and this time I began to paddle. I ducked under the water when I saw something that looked like an arm flail out but suddenly stopped when I ran into something hard and ice cold in the water. I knew then that it was glass or whatever had cut my toe on that day. Under the water, I saw a face move in the crystal ocean, and I knew that whatever it was laughing at was me. I had no idea what it was, and it had ruined my life. Every day, I had given it free rent in my own head, turning every thought to what it did to Marie and how it had messed up my life. Whatever it was, I knew when I came to that, it thought that it was funny. I woke up in a cold sweat, and I went jogging for the first time in my entire life 30 minutes later. The next day, I didn't remember if it was a nightmare, but I was still covered in cold sweat and I still went jogging. Push-ups and sit-ups followed that. Within 2 weeks, I had seemingly cut my drinking habit. After another month, about 2 weeks ago, I even started going swimming in the community pool. It scared the shit out of me so badly that I called in sick to work and I took some of Polly's treasured Xanax when I got home. But I kept doing it. I was swimming harder and faster, for once and then twice every day. Finally, I went to Home Depot and I bought some heavy gloves and an electric chisel that apparently works well underwater. Last week, I told Polly that I wanted to go to the beach again. I didn't tell him which one, and he wasn't familiar enough with the area to figure it out. He had owed me enough to buy a car at that point, and I had taken care of him like a doting parent for the months he had spent on my couch. I had some extra oxycodone, and I made sure he knew that it was available once we got there. And that was all I needed to do to get him to start talking about how much he wanted to go to the beach lately. I made sure he didn't have a big dose the night before, and we took off at about 5 in the morning, right before the sunrise starts over the water. Along the way, I tell him that I'm using the chisel to steal something moored underwater that I can easily sell, and I give him the small pouch of drugs I had been harboring to make sure he didn't ask any other questions. We got out of the car and we began to hike towards the house. The streaks of light turquoise, vibrant pink, and nebulous bolts of purple began to march out of the horizon when we reached the Iron's house. His mouth was hanging open just slightly, but Polly was still keeping his words together at that point. "Dude, it is awesome out. Like you were totally right." "Right. The water is perfectly clear." I didn't say much. I'm not a good liar. "Why don't you enjoy these bad boys and go for a swim? I'm about to take care of that thing that I told you about." I handed him the sandwich bag filled with the remaining pills. He took 2 more, making his total 6 for that morning. An absolutely massive dose. And then he got in the water. The ocean was perfectly flat again, reflecting the lurid colors of the sky and the green foliage along the edges of the water like a mirror. I could see everything underwater from the beach. Even fish swimming about in the deeper areas reflected glints of dazzling colors. He was having a ball while I put on my gloves and I got the chisel ready. I figured there was no way that I would have long. I got in the water and I swam out to the approximate area where the big glass thing was when Marie and I had visited the beach. At first, I began to freak out a bit, because I couldn't find it. But as I began to swim back to shore and reconsider, my knees scraped against something hard and ice cold. "Crap, I think something bit me." Polly looked down at his legs in shock and amazement, but he couldn't seem to find the culprit. I pulled at what seemed like the round top to a larger object under the water. I was glad as hell that I was wearing protective gloves. It didn't budge at all, and I thought that I would have to use the chisel to take a part off of it. But it seemed to twist off like a top from its base when rotated the round surface. "Help me! God, help me!" That was all I heard before Polly gurgled on his way under the water. I didn't bother to turn and look back, and I swam like holy hell. All the exercise barely did any good at all as I towed what seemed like a glass statue along the water. But a sudden tiny pseudo wave gave me just enough push to reach the shore. ahead of the smoothly coordinated turbulence that seemed to follow me, like the elegant wake of a determined alligator. I got to the shore safe, and I hooted loudly when both of my feet were on the shore. I dropped the glass-like thing onto the sand, and I took a deep breath, surveying the water. A massive cloud of red and what looked like a piece of red meat with some ribs floating about stood defiantly amidst the beauty, as if accusing me. Suddenly, something just splashed lightly near the shore. The thing hadn't swam back this time. "You want your shitty little statue back?" I angrily asked the water. And then I turned to see the thing sitting in the sand. Sure enough, it was some kind of glass-like material, in the shape of what looked like a seal-like creature with a large oval face and razor-sharp teeth. The glass wasn't smooth, but ragged and razor-sharp in areas, with sharp veins beneath the base that looked like glass made from a lightning strike. Later, on closer inspection, I came to the conclusion that it looked as if the shape had naturally formed from a lightning bolt, with the same telltale dense opaque areas and roots made from electrical discharge that one can find on glass made this way. Its features are harsh and strangely natural looking. Too bad, asshole. I took the chisel out of the holster I had placed over my trunks and I turned it on. It hummed angrily and whatever was in the water splashed desperately. When I put it into the surface of the creepy statue, it thumped a couple of hundred times and then promptly produced the sound of metal tearing. The water calmed down, but I still didn't feel like giving it back. I called the cops again, knowing that they would be checking local cameras to see if Polly was with me driving to the beach, and I got ready to avoid explaining myself. Thank God for nosy neighbors. It wasn't Gertrude this time, but sure enough, somebody was watching from a nearby house and told the police that they saw Polly go under. I told the cops that he was some weird guy and he wanted to see the spot where Marie had went missing. Despite the utterly wealthy witnesses with no reason to lie, they clearly didn't believe me. They scheduled a time for me to meet with the federal prosecutor next week and go over the case with my attorney present. But for now, I'm a free man and it's this thing that's a prisoner. I haven't had a nightmare since. I took a picture of the thing and Gertrude said that it looked like some of the relics that the A's and the Jago who used to live in the area left behind. And it's clearly a threatening looking Caribbean monk seal, which went extinct shortly after the Spaniards began to set up shop. I need to destroy this thing before I go to jail. I know that they'll find an excuse, and frankly, after what I did to Polly, I deserve it. I just want to make sure that this son of a bitch doesn't get its statue back. I've tried a hammer. I rented a jackhammer. I even covered it in lighter fluid and I lit it up. It didn't even warm it. The thing was still cold enough to feel from a foot away. Tomorrow I'm going to take this to my very odd friend of mine. This friend, who I met through Polly, had an unfortunate line of work. Thankfully, because of this, he doesn't ask questions and he knew where to get a large amount of acid. And a glass trough big enough for the statue. I'm going to do everything that I can to destroy this thing before I get sent away. That thing will not get the last laugh from me.